Okay, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Kuf Yud Zayin 117. We're a little behind, but not as behind as we were before. We pick up on Kuf Tet Zayin on Bet, about 20 lines down. It's lines up to the word Hasifanim, and we're dealing with different types of practices of how you donkey drivers and people, sailors, and so on. When something has to be done to save the ship, how do you distribute the cost? So it says that if it's an issue about casting off the weight, so you distribute it based on the different weight of the cargoes that everybody has brought on board. And now it says, but not to change from the normal practice among sailors or ship owners. And the ship owners are allowed. Anybody who loses a ship, supposedly they went in like a convoy of ships to do some trade or whatever they were doing. And so if one person's ship gets lost, right, because those things happen on a regular basis, so rather than it just being that person's bad luck, they all will share in the responsibility, and therefore, Yami still replaces ship. Of the lo bekusya, however, if it was lost, even though they say that, implicit, or what we should assume are the parameters are, that if it's lost in negligence, ein ma'amidim, then you would not replace it. Shelo bekusya, not with negligence, ma'amidim lo, you do replace it. And let's say this one guy, he took his ship and he went to a place or boat or whatever ship, I think makes it think like the Queen Elizabeth. If he took his boat to a place where it's not normally where the other boats were going, the not normal route, okay, then ein ma'amidim. So then you do not replace. That's seen as a type of a negligence, or maybe it's seen as he's breaking off from the group, and part of the ideas that is replacing is because you're part of the group. Okay, so the Gemara says pshita, obviously. That's not part of the deal. Look, the case would be that in the spring, where the waters run very high because the waters in the river, whatever, are coming off from the melted snow, so there's a very high water level. So people are only like one unit away from the edge of the shore. In Tishrei, they distance themselves where the water level is lower. They distance themselves 2 units away from the shore. Okay, this ship is going in. It's the spring where the ships are normally sailing closer to the shore, and it's going more in the center of the river, where the ships go when it's in the winter time, okay, or in the fall time. So he is going to a place that's not where the other ships are going, but it's a normal place where ships go at a different season. Okay, so in that case, now of course, Dafka during the springtime, it's very dangerous to go there because of the high water level, but it's not completely unusual for ships to be going there or it's normal for ships to be going there at another time in the year. So Ma'od Tema, I might have thought, Dav Sheinakit, Azil, it's just following, it's like its habit. I mean, I once was asking somebody for directions where to go somewhere, and I was borrowing their car, and it was a place that they went. Like I said, how do you get to this shopping mall? I said, just go in the car; it'll find, it'll know where to go. So anyway, so maybe the ship just knows where to go because it goes there all the time. Anyway, the point is that it's not crazy; it's a normal place where the ships go, except not during this time of year. Kamash Milan, that's not an excuse. In this time, the ships are closer to the shore, and if you go further from the shore, then it's negligent, and your ship does not get replaced. Okay, so the Tarabana, now we talk.
Do you think it's possible Rashi's reading in European like realities? I mean, like in Babylonia, the shlagim are really melting.
Yeah, I mean the Gemara discusses it all the time by mikvatim or whatever. I mean, I think that's a regular concept that the water level in rivers goes up significantly
because
in
of snow.
Yeah, because of melted snow.
Okay.
A caravan that was going to the wilderness. Amad guys for Tarfa, and some troops came and they plundered it. And one guy got up and he decided that he was going to take on the troops, and he managed to save the caravan. So then it doesn't like, oh, I saved it, I get to keep all of the wealth of the caravan because otherwise it would have been taken. No, it gets equally distributed. It still belongs to all the owners of the caravan, even though you did a wonderful thing and you saved it for all of us. But he says, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to fight off, these troops, but anything I save, I'm keeping for myself. Then it works. He gets to keep it for himself. So he says, what's the logic here? What's the case? If it's type of money that could be that everybody else they could put forth the effort and they could fight off the caravan and save it, so it's not yet hefker because it can be still saved. It's seen as salvageable. That's what we've been discussing until now. And then the stuff is not considered hefker. So in that case, the feel saving on the so who cares what he says? The stuff still belongs to the owners. It was salvageable, so he did the nice thing. He did it all by himself, but it belongs to the original owners. He doesn't get to keep it. If it wasn't salvageable and he did some great act of bravery, but under normal circumstances it wasn't, then it's automatically hefker. And even if he doesn't say anything, he should be allowed to keep it. So we're talking about partners. Okay, so they both jointly own the property. Okay, then how is it relevant what he says? In these types of circumstances, one partner can basically say, without the guy agreeing, you know what, I'm leaving the partnership. Like we're about to be attacked or whatever. I'm operating on myself. For myself, I am sort of separating from the partnership. So how does that work? Amar Pali. If he basically says, I'm going to save it for myself, then basically.
So I mean, the other guy isn't there.
No, he's there, but it doesn't matter. I have the right to say under these circumstances that that we're splitting.
Let's say the guy isn't there, then does he have right to do whatever he wants?
Yeah, I don't know who hears him make a declaration, but yes, he has a unilateral right in this case. Okay, so if he says I'm operating for myself, okay, so then this would basically work in a case what would be like Eino Yachal Lahatzio. Okay, so in case of Eino Yachal Lahatzio, it's hefka. Okay, so he basically says, so all this stuff is hefker. He basically says, I'm no longer seeing myself as a partner to my friend regarding this, with this property. It's all hefker. The troops are coming and going to take it. From here on in, it's every man for himself. And in that case, if he goes ahead and he saves it, he gets to keep it.
Because means we're separating.
Separating, not we split. It's confusing.
We're
splitting the partnership, not we're splitting the money.
Yeah.
We're splitting the partnership, and I'm operating now on my own behalf. Yeah. And the stuff is hefker. Right. Now, if I save it, I'm saving it all for myself.
Yeah.
Lo Amar, if I don't say anything, so even if the stuff is hefker because it's a normal case of Eino Yachal Lahatzio, but I'm still operating as part of our partnership. And therefore, Lo Pali had not split the partnership. So since I'm operating, if I don't say anything, the implicit point is I'm operating on behalf of the two of us. Okay? So yes, the stuff is hefker, but if you don't say anything, then you're operating on behalf of the two of you because the two of you were in partnership. All right, so that's one view. Rava Amar Hacha B'Pali Mafkin, in a similar approach, we're talking about workers. So it's basically now the idea that we split Le'emtza. It's funny because it sounds like I actually have a stake in that property. But the similar point is that I'm in your employee. I'm working here for Michael. Okay, if I don't say anything, so again, it's going to get taken by the troops. Under normal circumstances, it's not salvageable. It's considered hefker. But if I don't say anything, then anything I'm doing, because I was hired by Michael to come and to watch, his gold as we went through, as we took the caravan through the desert. So if I don't say anything, then I'm acting on behalf of my employer, and I'm saving it for Michael's sake. Okay, but if I do say something, I say I'm doing it for myself. It means like I'm saying, okay, I quit my job. I'm no longer working for you. Now I'm working for myself, and I get to keep it for myself.
Next time I'll bring a train line along the way.
Exactly. Okay, but that a worker, one of the workers' rights we were talking about the other day. Okay, a worker can quit his job even in the middle of the day. You hired him for the day. It's not indentured servitude. Okay, he's allowed to quit even during the middle of the day. But if I haven't quit my job yet, then if I don't say anything, I'm still working for my employer. And therefore, if I'm not saying anything, I just save it, I'm saving it for my employer. If I do say I'm saving it for myself, it means forget this job, every man for himself now. Okay? Now, but when he does reverse himself, meaning when he changes his mind, when he basically quits his job, there's a reason you're allowed to quit your job in the middle of the day. You're no longer working for your employer. The verse says, B'nai Yisrael are slaves to me. So everybody is a slave here. You can't be you're not a slave to a slave, right? Similar to the obviously negative, rhetoric that Kamma has, or discourse that Kamma has against somebody who sells himself into slavery, even though it's limited slavery for 6 years. So here the idea is we don't want to turn, being an employee into being enslaved to your boss. So it's a very
Talk
powerful
about the expression
statement,
slaves to your job, right?
Right, slave to your job. I don't know what I am sure that in different societies, I don't know what the reality was in the time of the Gemara, like in Roman society. But no, I'm sorry, when you sign a contract, you're not allowed to leave in the middle of the contract. And here, Chazal, very much you can leave, you quit your job even in the middle of the day. Okay.
So this is when you actually, even if you sign a contract? Or
Yeah.
Just a regular,
there could be penalty
just
clauses.
oral agreement. You guys come work for me today, and then you can leave the field in the middle of the
I
day.
think there could be penalty clauses. There could be consequences, but you're entitled to quit. You can't force me to work. Okay? So the Gemara says, when you are, the case is that, like we've been discussing before, that the stuff can be salvaged, but only with effort. So in that case, so how does it matter? It's still not hefker. So gali daite la'atzmo, lo gali daite la'emsa. So if you make it clear that, let me just, Rashi says, so Rashi says in this case, that goes back to Michael, where are the other owners of the stuff? So in this case, where it only could be salvaged with effort, if I say, I'm going to keep it to myself, and Michael here is also owns some of the property. He doesn't say, no, you're not, buddy, that's my stuff. He just hears it and is quiet. That means that he basically feels like, well, what the heck? The stuff is lost anyway. So he essentially hearing that and being quiet is accepting it as lost and implicitly Yeush and being mafkir it. Okay, but if I don't say anything, then since it is potentially salvageable, we don't assume it's hefker, and therefore the owners still retain it. Okay, that is the end of all those cases about something that's about to be lost, its status of being hefker or not. Now we continue with the next mission. Back to Gzela. Okay, you basically went ahead and stole a field from somebody else, and of course the question is, how exactly do you steal a field? Like, you claim it for yourself, you keep the other person off, you didn't physically take it away, and to what degree do normal laws of Gzela apply? So this Mishnah initially starts by assuming that maybe it does seem like normal laws of Gzela apply. The Natlu Masikin, and some bandits or take it, okay, away from you, just, shows you, you steal, somebody will steal from you. In Makas Medinahi, if it basically is a case where everybody in the in the county here is literally country, whatever. Everybody in this area is having their fields seized by by bandits or whatever, by who knows, troops, whatever, invading armies, whatever the case might be. So it's not specifically this field, everybody's field. In that case, you say to the owner, all right, you know what? Here's your field back. It's in the hand of these now troops. Okay. However,
Reading before they've.
No, they took it.
They took it already?
Yeah, they took it already now. So you took it, you owe the owner, you have to replace it to the owner or whatever, but now it's in the hands of these invading troops that have now seized everybody's fields in the region. So you can say, look, presumably what you're really saying is that even if I had done nothing, your field would have been taken by them. So at the end of the day, I really didn't do anything to you. So in that case,
your favorite case of the guy being held up, here's a $20 over there. So bandits are like at every street corner robbing you.
Well,
you do that?
No, because part of the question is how much is this part of the idea that karka is not stolen? Okay, which is the Gemara really, the basic issue that's in this Mishnah is not really explored by the Gemara. We're going to see in a minute. The Gemara is going to use it to take off to a very fascinating and different issue, but not the real point of this Mishnah. But if it was taken by these troops because of me, because they basically, have some eye on me, I owe them money, whatever, and they took it because of mine, because they perceived it to be mine, or somehow they were attracted to it because of me, and it's all my fault, then I have to replace it. So the funny thing here is, why exactly, first of all, what's the difference whether I'm to blame or not to blame? Usually, is whether it's considered to be damaged or not. What difference does that make? But there maybe you could say, it's sort of like if you remember before, like the flip of a case, like, if money isn't, is sort of discontinued, is discontinued everywhere, does it seem to be visible or not visible? So here maybe it's like a little bit of the flip. If everybody's field is being taken, so it's not like this is considered damage. This is the reality for everybody. If it's just this field that's being taken, then it is considered damage relative to everybody else. You could somehow make it about whether it's considered to be the same field, considered damage relative to other people's. But bottom line is that I thought fields weren't stolen. I thought karka wasn't stolen. I just walk away. Taking your karka doesn't come with any liability. And this Mishnah seems to feel like karka is stolen. But then what's the difference between these two scenarios? So it's really not clear what's going on in the Mishnah. You could read it as a type of more of a garmi type of a case, which is sort of, maybe I'm saying it because of what's going to come up in the Gemara, as you'll see, that technically karka isn't stolen and you just walk away. But Lamaisa, if basically it's your fault, this army seized it because of you and it's your fault or whatever, then we basically make you pay because it's you're to blame for the damage essentially that occurred. All right. So, but it's not really clear what's going on in the Mishnah. Why is one case a Reish Chalvanecha? Why is the other case not? Whatever happened to the fact that really karka is not seen as nigzelas, as able to be stolen, as leading to liabilities. So again, the best I could say is that if you're to blame and this person now doesn't have their field back because this troop is on it because you got involved, that's maybe some type of a garmi responsibility anyway, and that's similar to where the Gemara is going to go, and maybe that's why I'm saying it. Yeah.
So by your logic, if you stole my field, so if the troops are going because not because of you, because of me, then you can also show Reish Chalvanecha.
Absolutely. Okay. Amar Rav Nachman. Anyway, let's see where the Gemara goes with this. Amar Rav Nachman. Yitzchak man tani masikin lo mishtabesh, uman tani matzikin lo mishtabesh. Whether your this is masikin with a sin or matzikin with a tzad, what did I say? With a sin, with a samach. Thank you. With a tzadi, either one is an acceptable text of this Mishnah. It's not a corrupt text. Man tani matzikin lo mishtabesh. Go by the second one. Matzik with a tzadi. The thing b'matzor b'matzor.
That's right.
Right. There you go. Right. And in siege and in siege. I don't know whatever. Anyway, but you're being besieged by troops. So matzikin are troops that are besieging and seizing the property. Mandatani matzikin lo mishtabesh t'chsiv yeresh hatzlatzal. What yeresh? Yeresh hatzlatzal, that tzlatzal will despoil your field. So what does that mean? Despoil. So Matarganina and Yachsanina will inherit it. Saka'a. So what's saka'a? That's the word masikin. So I said the word saka'a is a type of a locust. Okay, and therefore it means that locusts they cover the fields and they just move in. They're invasive and they take stuff that isn't theirs. They eat up all the grain. So therefore, it's sort of making using as a metaphor here. They're like locusts, and that's the word masiki. Tosa said the word saka'a means like to rise up, and it really means like the enemy. It doesn't mean locust. It's not a metaphor. It's more literal.
The locusts are your enemy.
I understand, but anyway, the question is specifically what the word. Moving on. Imad Gazan Chayev. If it's the Gazan's fault that it was taken, then he has to reimburse. Hechidam. What does it mean? It's his fault. If all it's saying is that these troops or whatever they are, it seized just his land, the land of the Goslin, including the land he stole, and it didn't seize other people's lands. That's implicit from the beginning of the Mishnah. Imakas Medina, if it's occurring to everybody, you walk away. So implicit in that is elo. If it's not happening to everybody, if it's just happening to you, lo, you don't walk away. You have to reimburse. So why did you have to spell it out? And of course, the Mishnah often spells out both sides. But the way Tosos explains the question is, why didn't the Mishnah just say Imakas Medina? Omer Reish Chalvanecha, in love, he's chayav. Why did it say Imachmas Hagazlin? Even that's not such a big question. It's just a parallel phrasing. But obviously, the Gemara is getting somewhere. So the Gemara says, "Lo tzricha the achle of achvuye," and this is going to be the focus of the whole daf, where the case is not just that bandits moved in and seized his property, but basically, it's not a case of gazelle at all. Some bandits came up, or troops, and said, "Show us where Reuven's fields are. We want to seize Reuven's fields." And me being a good citizen, I point out where Reuven's fields are, and then they go and they seize Reuven's fields. So that's a different case. It's not about gazelle at all. Machmas hagazan. Why it's calling it gazan, not clear. We'll see in a minute. But anyway, if I basically point out the field and the field gets seized, I'm liable.
So are we assuming that you're the only one who knew? Like they couldn't find out someone else?
I don't know if I'm the only one. I was the one who did it. Okay.
So achle achvaye means he told on him.
Yeah,
He
pointed it out. He pointed it out. Right.
If this army is asking you where something is, you're supposed to risk your life.
Well, so that's what we're going to get to. We're going to get to the question of whether you're onus or not onus. It's a big debate that we showed. It's going to come up in a minute. Okay, so we're going to see that. Okay, so the Gemara says. Another way of saying this is how I'm asking them going to Ansua Akum. So the first one it wasn't forced that your life was at stake. Maybe the first one they were just asking you for a favor. Okay, but here they're holding a gun to your head. Okay, the Amile Achve Arasa. Show us Arase. Show us your land. Okay, so he said, "Oh, here's all my land." So they seized your land, but you pointed out the one you stole among your land. So then You shouldn't have pointed that one out. That was the guy. That wasn't yours. That was something you stole. Okay, but the bottom line is in both of these cases, and we have yet to have a case where it's never explicit yet, because you didn't have to point out the stolen one as your land. The first case, it wasn't clear they were holding the guns to your head. Right now, all we have the idea is, we'll get to the case about being really forced in a minute, but you're just volunteering. You could have said, I don't know. You pointed out, and therefore you're high for the damage that's done. So the question is, what type of liability is this? And Tosfos, I was going to say much later on, but Tosfos brings it in here. It's a type of a garmi, right? It's really just grama, it's indirect. It's not considered gzela, it's more considered mazik. You have troops now that are staying on your field, right? In a way the field isn't even damaged. So anyway, it's a type of a garmi, but this is now the big case of now this is more broadly, I'm sure you've all heard of the concept of a moser, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who hands over a Jew to the non-Jewish authorities. Here you're being moser their land. And a little bit, we're going to get to the idea that if you start by being moser their land, does it ultimately lead to them their lives also being endangered? Once the government starts getting its claws, like once the mafia takes a little bit of an interest into your business, not good for any, not good. So anyway, but here it seems to be it's a type of a garmi. You are the cause of it. It directly happened. As a result, you're liable.
What's the Rashi Tevot here? Hey, Betayin?
Oh,
that's
okay,
right.
so in other words, it's like this. Who gava the afia karya the chite the beireish kalusa. So a certain guy pointed out a pile of wheat that belonged to the Reish Kalusa, which is the Jewish head of the government, but they were being asked by the non-Jewish authorities. Okay. Also, the governor of Nachman came to Rav Nachman actually was related to the Reish Kalusa. Chayvi Rav Nachman l'shlume. Rav Nachman said you got to pay for that pile of wheat that you handed over to the authorities. From Yosef Rav Yosef Achoid Rav Huna, so Barchia. So Rav Yosef was sitting behind Rav Huna Barchia. Yosef Rav Huna Barchia coming to Rav Nachman. So as Rav Nachman gave the ruling, then Rav Huna Barchia, and behind him Rav Yosef. Amalei Rav Huna Barchia Rav Nachman. Rav Huna Barchia said to Rav Nachman, Dino Knasa, when you're making this guy who pointed out the wheat pay, is that the law or is that a fine? So Amalei Masnisini, he says, I don't know, it's a Mishnah. He didn't say no. Anyway, he says, it says if the Gazan was to blame, you have to replace it. And the tradition that we have to interpret what that Mishnah means is that the Gazan, it's not really Gazan, he just pointed out where the wheat was, where the field was, and that creates liability. Okay? Now, but I'm not. I don't know whether it's or I'm not saying I don't know. Whatever whether it's mammon or knas. But after he left, Emily Rav Yosef Rav Yosef was sitting 2 rows back. Says Rav Barchia, why do you ask the question? What difference does it make to you? Whether it's considered din, like that's actually this, the law, or whether it's just a fine. Idina knasa. Idina gaminamina. Because if it's din, then it represents a basic principle of law. And if it represents a principle of law, we can apply it to all cases that follow that same principle. Iknasa, but if it's a fine, then it's then it's relatively arbitrary. There's no deeper principle here, and maybe every circumstance is different, right? Maybe this guy was a habitual person. Maybe it was a certain time that it was necessary to stamp down on this. There's a lot of circumstantial issues that come up with whether we should impose.
I thought you couldn't do knos on Bava anyway.
All right, that's a different question. I know the answer. Okay, that's actually a Torah knas. Anyway, but logo minamina. The point is, anyway, if it's a knas, you can't just extrapolate.
Oh, wait, so you can't do a Torah knas, but you can do a non.
Yeah, I mean, you put people chayrim, a lot of an extrajudicial thing. Anyway, we not say with the miknas logo. And how do you know that from knas you cannot extrapolate? The time we talk about brisa. That if somebody makes somebody's grain tamei or pours somebody's wine to avodah zarah, they have to pay for it. Now the point is that hezer kenu nicker. The damage is not visible. You can't see that the grain is tamei or the wine has been poured to avodah zarah. And even though non-visible damage you normally should be exempt, they nevertheless said that you had to pay. Okay, that's what they said originally.
You mean because a whole barrel now is a problem? Because the part you spilled is obviously have to pay for it.
Yeah, or you could spill from one to another, but yes. Then they said, you know what, not only that case, even if you mixed up truma grain into chulin grain, because now the whole thing has to be treated like truma and has less of a market value. Okay, so chazru in, only they went back and they gave a new ruling. Lo chazru lo, but if they had not given a new ruling, you could not have extended it. My time, what's the reason? Lav mishum deknasi. It must be because this isn't the din. The din is hezek shenu nicker, is not hezek. It's a fine. We couldn't extrapolate. So if they wanted to apply it to another case, it needed another ruling. So here you see something that is a fine. You cannot extrapolate to other cases. Someone says, well, no, it's not necessarily a fine. Maybe it was a din, but there was a logic why they thought that it might not extend to the third case. Even a din has parameters. That this would only apply to cases of large loss, right? Because the Metami and Menasech, where the whole wine basically became unusable. As a small loss, they weren't concerned. A small loss was mixing it up with the truma with the other grain, because it's just now has a truma status, but you don't have to basically throw it out. But with Sof Savi laughs in Nami Chashishu. In the end, they figured, you know what, we're going to apply it even in cases of small loss. Now, the funny thing is, saying it's a concern of degree of loss does not seem to me to be a consideration of din, right? It seems to me to be a consideration of policy. Right? I mean, if this type of an act has liability, it shouldn't matter big loss or small loss. To say it'll only apply in cases of big loss and not small is a policy consideration, which to me seems to suggest knas. So it seems interesting that the Gemara has an idea that there's a concept of din that somehow factors in policy considerations. And maybe that's true. Maybe everybody agrees. Me, Iker hadin your putter, hezek chenu nicher lo shmei hezek. Okay, but we're going to extend rabbinically the definition of hezek. And the way we're extending it is by taking into, under certain circumstances, taking policy considerations, but we're still conceptualizing it as a type of a hezek, and we're not conceptualizing it as a fine. So do people hear my point? Meaning normally policy leads to knas, policy doesn't lead to din. Okay, so part of this issue is not just what motivates us to be doing this. You know, maybe we're motivated due to policy concerns and people are getting out of hand. But in the end of the day, how do we frame it? Do we frame it as now an expansion of the halacha, or do we frame it as a fine that we're imposing on someone? Okay, so anyway, so it says you can't learn from here because it could be din, but there's still a logic to distinguish between the cases. So the Gemara says 1 minute. Tani avud Rabbi Avin, but the father Rabbi Avin teaches the Bryce in a different way. First, they only applied it to the case of making the grain tameh or mixing it up. Then they said even pouring it to avodah zarah. Now that the second case is a bigger hefsed. Okay, the wine is worthless. So why didn't they just logically extrapolate? So chazru in only when they went back and legislated again. Lo chazru lo. Otherwise not. My time. What's the reason? Obviously, logically, that case certainly should have logically been included. It must be because we're seeing this as a fine, and even though logically other cases should be included, you can't extrapolate if it's based on a concept of fine. So the Gemara says, no, it's not why it is. No, it's based on din, and even based on din, there would be a reason to exclude the case of wine, of pouring the wine to avodah zarah. Why? It's the debate of Rabbi Avin and Rabbi Yirmiyah. Originally, they thought wine you would not have to pay by pouring to avodah zarah, like Rabbi Avin. Somebody on Shabbos shot an arrow, and you're considered carrying when it goes 4 amos in Rishus Harabim. Okay, so you shot the arrow, and at the 2 amma marker, it tore through somebody's nice shirt, and then it landed at the end of the 4 amos. Do you say kimle b'derava b'nei? Right, you're doing an act that's liable to be for the death penalty, chilul Shabbos. In the process of the act, something is being damaged. You're exempt. Do you consider this to be while the act is being done, or is the act of chilul Shabbos only taking place when the arrow rests? And in the pathway, it's not yet the act of chilul Shabbos. Okay, so originally, yes, but does kimle apply to any part of the process, or does kimle only apply to the moment when you're chayiv? Okay, so a putter. So he says you're exempt. The picking up, the whole act of chilul Shabbos requires all these components. It needs to be picked up. It needs to be put down 4 amos later, and it needs to travel 4 amos. So therefore, all of this is part of the act of chilul Shabbos, and we say kimle and you're exempt. And that's why they originally said you're exempt for the pouring of the wine, because you're doing it in an act that's chayav nisa, and an act of avodah zarah. Okay, and you're liable. In the end, he held Rabbi Yirmiyah, like Rabbi Yirmiyah. The Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Mishasad Ba Kanye, Yichayev leMamon, Mitchayev b'nafshe lo have hachas nisach. Rabbi Yirmiyah said specifically about the case of Yayin Nesach that it's not the same. Why is it not the same? Because he said, or not the same, but he basically disagrees. Anyway, he says when you pick up the wine, you're chayev for Geneva. And you're not chayav for avodah zarah until you pour it. Okay, so now one way to read that is he would argue on the Shabbos case as well, and he would say I don't care if it's during the process of the act. We only say kimle at the moment of liability. So the moment of liability by the arrow is at the end, and only then would we say kimle, not during the process. And the moment of liability by pouring the wine is when the wine is poured, not. And but the act of geneva, of course, you could say is it geneva or is it mazik? The act of geneva came when the wine was picked up. Okay, so therefore that's why. I mean, this is a very whole interesting sugya, and we don't have really time to unpack that. But the point is, it could be debated whether you say kimle in this case, and therefore that was the issue. So it is din. It's not. It doesn't matter whether it's din or whether it's knas. Now I realize what I was saying it wrong. I apologize. Okay. The reason is, I mentioned before that because of the policy considerations, it was sounding like it was knas. It is assuming it's knas. The Gemara assumes that it's not a question whether this payment here about b'tamim midameh is din or knas. Clearly, it's knas. The din is hezek shenu nikar lo shmei hezek. You should not be paying. Clearly, any payment here is seen of as a type of a knas. Okay. The question is, can you extrapolate from one ruling of knas and extend it to other logically similar ones? Okay, so the answer is, you see, if they needed another ruling, you can't extrapolate. And the Gemara was saying, no, you can extrapolate, but only in ones that are logically similar. Okay, so so initially the question was, a case of lesser loss isn't logically similar. So even if you're allowed to extrapolate by knas, they couldn't extrapolate to include the case of lesser loss. Here they're saying, even if it's knas and you can extrapolate, it wouldn't necessarily apply to a case of kimle. Okay, and this might have been constituted a kimle, and that was the question, whether this was a case of kimle or not. All right. So anyway, this is all a bit of a digression, but it gets us to the question of when you're saying you have to pay for pointing out that field. This is an important question. Is that seen as a knas and a way of stamping down on, behavior that obviously is injurious to society, or is it seen as a type of a din that you brought about damage of something else? That's like a garmi. By the way, that's a whole debate in the Rishonim about garmi in general. Right, when you burn somebody's shtaros, other cases of garmi, you put poison in front of somebody's animal or whatever the case might be, right? Is that a knas as a way of punishing and stopping the behavior, or is it a case of din? Is it an expansion of what it means to damage somebody's property? Okay, so that's the question here, and the logical question is, if it's knas, we might not be able to extrapolate. The case of knas was hezek shenu nikar, and the Gemara says, no, maybe you can extrapolate, but you have to extrapolate within logical parameters, and some of those would not have been normal extensions of the same case. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. Rav Huna bar Yehuda equal to Avioni. So Rav Huna bar Yehuda, Rav Yehuda came to the states of the house of Avioni. Also coming to Mom. Yeah.
Avioni is usually
right. Also coming to Rav, he came to Ramah. I'm like, hey, how you doing there, Rava? Have any interesting things happened to you this last week? I'm like, yeah, you know what? Yisrael shansu of the Kuchavim there, Maman Chaver Boliyadi. I had a case where a Jew was forced, and here we have the case again right about explicitly being forced, and pointed out property of a non-Jew. And I made him reimburse. Amarle, so he said to Rava, Ahadra uvda lamare. You know what? You should go ahead and reverse your ruling and give the money back to the guy who pointed it out. Why? Tanya. If a Jew is forced by non-Jews and he pointed out his friend's money, he's exempt. Only if he literally picks it up and hands it over is he chayav. Now, there's a very interesting debate in the Rishonim. What is the difference of pointing out and handing over? So Rashi says the basic difference is that handing over, you're doing more than is asked of you, and therefore you're not forced to hand it over. You could have just said where it is, and you said, "Hey, let me help you." And you went and you picked it up and you delivered it. Okay, and that makes you, because in that act of delivering it, nobody was holding a gun to your head. All you had to do was point, and you now actively took it without being forced to take it. So then you're the ganav, you're the mazik. All right, so if that would mean if they would actually hold the gun to your head and make you hand it over, you would be exempt. Other Rishonim, the Rif and others, say the Gemara should have then just distinguished between whether you were forced in that moment or not forced, right? It's not really about handing it. And they say even with the gun to your head, okay, you actually are liable, which is a very strange point. Like, what are you supposed to do? You're not supposed to give up your life. You might remember, by the way, a while ago, we learned a discussion about whether are you allowed to save yourself? Now, it is very strange to think you have to give up your life rather than cause damage to your friend's property. So most people shouldn't understand. The question is, fine, you're allowed to do it, but you still have to pay for it. Okay, so yes, you're allowed. Nobody is going to make you up in heaven say, how could you do a sin of gzela? Of course, your life was at stake. Nobody's going to blame you morally for doing it. But nevertheless, your friend's property was destroyed. Why should your friend have to be the one that paid? He lost his property in the process of you saving your life. You should be the one to be reimbursing him for that, okay? Still, with all of that being said, it is a little bit strange if the gun is being held to your head. It's one thing to say, I don't know, like, somebody is running after me and I take Michael's, whatever I take. I take my iPhone. I take my iPhone and I throw it at the guy to distract him, so I run away. So then, okay, I broke his iPhone, saving my life. I should reimburse him for his iPhone. Okay, here, the guy holds a gun to my head and says, show me where Michael's iPhone is. When or hand me over Michael's iPhone, I pick it up. How much am I really doing that, right? The whole act is compelled and it shouldn't even be attributed to me and seen as mine act. So that is a little bit different, a lot different. Nevertheless, that is how a number of Rishonim read it. If I actively do it, even if a gun is held to my head, nobody is blaming me for it. Of course, it's what I was supposed to do, but I have to reimburse. Yes, Jenna.
I feel like the difference between the iPhone example and the land example is someone's coming after you and you use whatever's in the area that happens to save your life.
Right.
You're the one in trouble, right? Whereas the land one, this army is clearly going after Michael, right? It's not about you. You're collateral.
That's even a better point. That's just strengthening my point that with the gun to your head, you're just sort of being used by them. You're really not even an agent at that.
But I wonder if that's different if you're the one handing it over somehow.
Even if they were telling me to hand it over?
Yeah, that somehow you're more involved in the land in that way. If they're just asking you to point it out, okay, you say no, they're gonna ask the next person. It's not about you.
Right, it makes you more. But again, all of that could be as if I choose to hand it over, right? With the gun to your head and what you act strengthens it, right? Not only am I being used by them without being an agent here, right? My agency doesn't exist really in this case, but your point is right. They're anyway not interested in me, they're interested in the land. So to say it, Rashi's reading that I didn't have to hand it over, I could have just pointed out, makes more logical sense. But many Rishonim read this to mean even with the gun to my head, I have to reimburse.
So I understand how the parallel is for the land, because from Tatalin, I pick it up.
No, we're no longer talking specifically about land. It says not to Vanasan. We're not talking about yet land.
Mamon Chavero.
Mamon Chavero.
Right. No. So then what do you? But land there is no natava nothing but
Right. So then
is it more lakula or more lachumra?
It would be more lakula. Then with a gun to your head, you'd always be exempt because you could never actually physically hand it over.
So that
right. Okay. Well, no, just her case wasn't limited to land. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Okay. If you volunteer the information by pointing it out, then it's like you handed it over. Great. So again, that raises the question though: is the handing over because you didn't have to hand it over or not? But certainly, if you did it on yourself, then you have an agency. You weren't compelled. That's an obvious case. You should be chayav. Who gavra the ansur of the kuchavim the achvei achama the Rav Mari braid Rav Pinchas braid Rav Chizda. So a certain person was forced by the non-Jews, and he pointed out the wine of Rav Mari, etc., the son of Rav Chizda. Amalei. Okay, and then the question was: is he now going to have to reimburse? So Amalei Dari v'amti ba'adan. Come with us and let's, load yourself up. Let's go on a journey. Let's go to court and see whether you have to reimburse or not. He went with an came to Ravati. Patrinu. Ravashi said, you're exempt. You don't have to reimburse. 1 minute, didn't we say if you hand over with your hand, you directly your chayav? Now, of course, it didn't say that he handed over. It just said achve. He pointed it out. But anyway, presumably it sounds like the case was he picked it up and handed it over. That is, if they're not directly standing over the property they're trying to seize. He originally got, he pointed it out. So they said, show us where the wine is. So he pointed it out, he said, and he showed them where it was. Okay, and there he was in the cellar with all the wine. And they say, great, now load up our truck with it. Okay, so first, since they were already there, okay, in that case, mikla kalye, it's like it's burnt up. As soon as the troops are in his cellar, okay, with the wine that he pointed out, and he yet hasn't physically handed it over, at this stage, the wine is considered to already be destroyed. So now, actively participating is no longer destroying his property. His property was already destroyed, and that happened before he actively participated. All right, so that's an interesting sort of loophole, as it were. All right, so now the Gemara says like this.
Meaning, so if they're already on someone's land, and you point out is their
What's left to point out? No, yeah, but it doesn't matter whether they moved or didn't move. The point is, if your active participation is after they're already standing over the property, if they say, go get us the wine, okay, even with a gun to your head, okay, then you're still participating. And by the way, that makes it make a little bit more sense. They can put a gun to my head and say, go get the wine, but still the fact is, I go, if I'm not there with the gun to my head at the moment I'm picking it up, maybe that's why I'm still seen as a little bit more of an agent, But if they're right there with me when it's happening, then it's already like, I would say I'm no longer an agent, but the Gemara is saying it's already like the object is destroyed. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Ezri Rabbi Avo Ravashi. Rabbi Avo asked Ravashi. Amarlo Anas. So a murderer, a bandit says, Hoshili Pakia Amir. Hand me over this bundle of grain or something. Or this cluster of grapes. And you hand it over. Chayav. So you're chayav, and it sounds like he's standing right there. So why are you chayav? It's not something not to be out, but you just said that if you're standing right there, it's like the thing is already destroyed. So the Gemara says, no, you're on two opposite sides of the river. So actually, he's not able to take it himself. Okay, in that case, that he's not able to take it himself, then you are actively not, giving it, and you're an active participant. Dikanami, diktani, hoshit. It says, extend to me this. The low tani 10, not just give it to me. Shmamina. So now, although the Gemara again makes the distinction of if he's there or not, whether the object is considered destroyed, it also helps us understand a little bit why you're considered more of an agent, even though your life is being threatened. It's true your life is being threatened, but you're still now, the Ganav is not right directly over the object. You're still bringing the object to the guy. And it's true that he's threatening that if you don't do it, he'll kill you, but you are still the one that sort of is, there's some greater degree here of making it happen. Not totally directly being used by the guy, but myself sort of, there's some greater sense of agency. So some way of understanding a little more. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this, Hahu Shuta, so there was a certain, what's the Shuta again here? Rashi says, hold on. A net, a fish net that was being debated, fought over by two people. This one says it's mine. This one says it's mine. So one of them just basically handed it over to the king's officer. Said, well, since we're fighting it and I'm never going to get it, sort of like a King Shlomo he's doing to himself, might as well just give it up, give it to the king.
By the way,
okay. No distractions. So then the other guy said, okay, you are a moser, pay me for my net. So he could say, it was my net I gave her. I didn't go over your net. Okay. Amalei Rava, why would he be believed? He's claiming it, but they should have to first try to prove whose net it was. He can't just say it was my net and walk away. Okay. So Ella Amarava Mishamtina Le Adamaisi Le V'Kai Bedina. We put him in Cherem until he retrieves the net, and then we're able to have the court case over the net. So he has to restore it, even though because of the possibility that it belongs to the other person, until we can so that we can work out that case. Okay, now we get to a really interesting story. A certain man was prepared to point out his friend's straw. Seeing that's relatively trivial, it's just straw. Anyway, also coming to Rav. So he came to Rav. Now, whether he came to Rav to ask, is he allowed to do it? The friend took him to Rav. It's interesting. Anyway, Amalei, lo sichvi v'lo sichvi. You better not, don't point it out. Don't point it out. Amalei, machvinu machvina. I don't care. I'm pointing it out. I'm going to do that to protect my life or whatever I'm doing. Okay, so Yosef Rav Kahana, the Kamei to Rav. So Rav Kahana was sitting in front of Rav. Shamte leka'u yemine. He broke the guy's neck. He wanted to prevent this guy from doing it. Now, he killed him. So much for his life. It wasn't clear in this case whether the guy's life was being threatened or not, right? Because until now, we might make you pay, but it doesn't seem like, you have to, whatever. Okay, Kari Ravi Luya.
Who broke the guy's neck?
Rav Kahana broke the neck of the guy who was about to be Moser. Okay, so Rav said.
Rav Kahana.
Yeah. So Rav said, "Banecha ufu shukfu b'rosh kol chutzos kitom michmar." Your children have fainted and lie down, in the outdoors like a trapped bull or something. The same way when bull falls in a trap. They have no compassion. They slaughter him. Af Mamanch Yisrael, the money of the Jews, once the non-Jews start seizing and getting involved, start putting their eye on you, Ein Rachmim, they have no compassion. Now, who do they not have compassion on? Rashi says it means then eventually the Jew's life will be at stake, which makes sense why he was sort of seeing this guy as a type of a road dave. Tosa says the guy's property they'll have no compassion on, which doesn't explain it, okay, but then why could you kill this guy?
You can't be criticizing him then, according to
no, because we're going to, well, maybe, that's interesting, but that doesn't sound like that. It sounds like the pasuk is being quoted to somehow defend the action. Anyway, let's take a look where the story goes. Okay, you also, I think, have to assume that the guy's life wasn't being threatened, that he was somehow seen as some evil person that had to be stopped, right? I mean, if he was coming to Rav, presumably he had a choice whether to do it or not, right? Okay, so it sounds like it was a case that maybe his property was being threatened, but it sounds like he had a choice. Okay, and he had a choice, and therefore, to do it would be a terrible thing. Such a terrible thing. It's not just a monetary issue that you should. Rav Kahana felt he had to take his life. So let's take a look. Amalei Rav Kahana. Amalei Rav. Yeah. So Rav
said,
all
like deliberate. Rav Kahana did it.
Yep. It seems to be. So Rav said, Kahana. Until now, we were only being ruled by Persians. Persians don't care about murder. You could have gotten away with it. Now there are Greeks, that are concerned about murder, and you're not going to get away with this. Now, of course, the question is the history right? Did the Greeks come after the Persians or before? Yeah. Which one really was? So if you look at the side has Girsa, that's the exact flip. So your English has the Greeks.
Oh, yeah, the Greeks came after. But I mean, historically, the Greeks came after, right?
The Greeks came after the Persians when the Jews were in Bava.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so there's a question which the order was, and there's also a question.
Shivat Zion was Persian. Shivat Zion was Persian. Was
right.
Yavesh,
right.
And afterwards were Hellenists.
Yeah, but the Hellenists in where the Jews were in Bavel, when were there Hellenists in Bavel? I don't know. Anyway,
what's the point though? Why does it matter whether he's going to get away with the murder?
Well, because we're going to see he's going to have to go and hide if he's not going to get away with murder.
No, I mean, if they're actually worried about it, then you should have done this anyway. Meaning, if the Greeks are not going to murder,
okay, what's past is past. Now the question is there going to be repercussions? They're going to find out you murdered this guy, and now you better run.
No. What I'm saying is, then if they actually come out to murder, then presumably you didn't have to kill this guy because they're not going to kill you for kill that guy.
No, that's not what it means. No, that's not what it means.
When Alexander took over, that was around the 3rd century BC.
Right.
Century.
Right.
The Persians before that, the Persian Empire.
In Israel.
But he took over all the lands of Alexander took over the whole known world.
Yeah.
I don't know how it affects.
Okay, so you're saying that when the Jews were in Bavel in the time of...
I don't know. This is late, right? I mean, these rabbis...
When the time of the... Anyway, I don't know enough of the history. Anyway, there's a question what the order was and which one cared about Jews murdering other Jews. But right now, we're dealing with a government that cares about Jews murdering other Jews. And so you're in trouble, okay? But Amri, and they say... What? What do you say? And yeah, 1 second, I just got to read this next line. But Amri, and they say, Mardin, which I would like to read as murder. I don't know if that's exactly what they say. They translate it as murder. Yeah. So anyway, they'll say you're a murderer. So in that case, Kum Saklar Yisrael, go run to Israel. So go hide from the authorities. The Kabbalah and accept upon yourself the Loti Kilu Rabbi Yochanan Sheva Shanis. Of course, you're going to go to Israel. You're going to want to go to the yeshiva. The yeshiva you're going to go to Rabbi Yochanan. So accept upon yourself that you don't challenge him for 7 years. Now, why is that? It's not clear. Like, is that to not be discovered by the authorities? Is that because even though you killed this guy and it could be defensible, you really shouldn't have killed him? So it's a type of a golus and an onus that you're imposing on yourself. Never really spelled out why he's not supposed to ask for 7 years. What does Cohen say about Greeks?
During Rav's lifetime, after many generations of the empire being ruled by the Parthians, the Persian Empire underwent a fundamental change, and new Sassanid emperors from central Persia came to power. Although the Parthians were also Persian, they had been culturally more influenced by the Greeks, who had preceded them in the region of their empire than the Sassanids were. Meaning,
so originally it was the Hellenized Persians.
Came after the Hellenized Persians.
Right. So originally it was the Hellenized Persians, and then it's the non-Hellenized Persian, right? And then it's the Persians that are more so. Right. And the Hellenized Persians didn't care as much about Jews murdering other Jews as the real Persians did.
It was a form of feudalism in which the central government exerted loose control, allowing a high degree of autonomy both for provincial leaders, often called kings, and for different ethnic and religious groups.
So since it was an internal Jewish thing, so
Right.
originally it was the Hellenized Persians, and it was more internal Jewish, and you could get away with it. Now we've got very nice. Okay, all right, good use of the card there.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's read a little bit of this great story. Okay, Azil Ashkei Reish Lakish. So Rav Kahana went to Eretz Yisrael and he found Reish Lakish. Yosef B'Kai Masai Mesif to Diyam L'Rabbanan. He was finishing the Chazara Shir for the rabbis. Reish Lakish was Rabbi Yochanan's prime Talmud and colleague, and he was reviewing the lesson for all the other rabbis of the academy. Amalahu Reish Lakish. Amalahu. So Rav Kahana said to the other rabbis, Reish Lakish Heicha, where's Reish Lakish? Amalei, they said to Amalei, why do you want to know? Amalei, hi kusha, because I have this question and this question. And then I have this answer and this answer. So like he was showing how whatever, all the problems he had and all the answers, right? Amalei Reish Lakish. They said to Reish Lakish, there's this guy that came from Bava and he's asking all these kashas on the shir. Other Reish Lakish on the what you told over in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Other Reish Lakish, Amalei Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish went to tell Rabbi Yochanan, Ari Alami Bavel. A lion came up from Bavel. Lion might be mesifta l'machar. Go and look into the sugya you're going to teach tomorrow. Because he's going to challenge you a lot or whatever. You got to be you got some new student here. Okay, l'machar osva b'dar Kamma. The next day, they put Rav Kahana in the first row of the base medrash, right, for the prize students. Now, coming to Rabbi Yochanan, in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, remember, he had accepted upon himself to not challenge Rabbi Yochanan for 7 years. Amar Shmaitita, so Rabbi Yochanan taught some sugya, and he was silent. He didn't ask. Shmaitita, another teaching, and he was silent. So they put him to the back of the class. Okay, seven rows in the back. Until they put him at the very back row. Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, Ari Shamarta, the lion you were talking about, Nasa Shual, it turns out to be a fox. So Rav Kahana heard this, was very offended. He said, hey, Rava, may be God's will, the Hani Shavadari, the 7 rows that I was put back, should be an exchange of the 7 years of silence that I had accepted upon myself, the Amili, or that Rav had imposed upon me, the Amili Rav, that Rav had imposed on me. Kamma he got up on his feet. He said, could you please chazer the first thing you were saying today? So Amar Shmaitita, so he went back, he told over the first teaching, Rabbi Yochanan, and he challenged it. So he kept on challenging everything all over again. So they put him to the first row. Amar Shmaitita, and then they kept on challenging. So what are you going to do more to show how important he is, right? So Rabbi Yochanan have a Yossi Vasheva Bastarki. Rabbi Yochanan was sitting on 7 pillows. So they removed 1 pillow from under him. Amar Shmaitita, he told another, sugya over, and Rav Kahana challenged again. So every time Rav Kahana asked a question that Rav Yochanan did not have a good answer for, right? The whole point is that Rav Yochanan didn't respond. It was he showed that he was wrong. He slugged him up, as we would say in the yeshiva. So every time he did that, Rav Yochanan lowered his status. He took another pillow out. Okay, until all the pillows were removed from underneath him. And he was sitting on the ground. And Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yochanan was very old. And his eyelashes were very long.
Like eyebrows?
And eyelashes were very long. Amalahu, so he said, Dolly Einai, lift up my eyes, lift up my eyelashes so my eyelids will be lifted, and then I could see him. They lifted it up to him with silver tongs. So, by the way, what's his name from YU? What's the name of the guy that does the academic Talmud in the Babylonian context of the Gemara? Yaakov Elman points out that here they're telling a story about Rabbi Yochanan that lives in Eretz Yisrael, but they're telling it totally through this Persian, this Babylonian lens of these stories, because in the Babylonian stories or whatever, they're the ruler or whatever it is this big heavy guy and he's sitting on these all of these pillows and he has these long eyelashes that are being lifted up with silver tongs. Apparently it's like a trope, in terms of these Babylonian stories, and now it's being read onto Rabbi Yochanan who's living in Eretz Yisrael. The whole idea that tends to be that in the Gemara Bavli they imagine the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael are through a Babylonian lens. But here, even just the whole visuals are very Babylonian. Anyway, okay. So Okay, so they lifted up his eyelids. The party safzase. They saw that Rabbi Chana's lips were split. A sadar, that was just a physical condition he had. But he thought, Rabbi Yochanan thought, he was laughing at him. That Rabbi Chana was mocking him. So Chalash Daitis, Rabbi Yochanan felt despondent. He was like that. He was so pained that this Talmud now was mocking him. So V'nach Nafshe. So not Rabbi Yochanan. So of course, Rabbi Yochanan feeling bad caused Rav Kahana to die. Okay, that was the what?
That was the
Because that was the punishment
anyway for this guy.
Yeah, since he went to maybe Rav anticipated this or something. So it's sort of like Rav Kahana went into Gullus. The irony is going into Gullus is going to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, he went into Gullus because he didn't really keep the terms of the Gullus. He wound up dying as a result.
No, but he broke the guy's neck.
Right.
This is his ultimate.
I know, that's what I meant. He killed somebody. He went into Gullus. What do you do by killing? You go into Gullus. Okay, and as a result of not keeping the terms of the Gullus, in the end, Rav Kahana died. So there seemed to be some, paying back for killing this guy. That Rav was not totally happy with what Rav Kahana had done.
That if he had followed that silence, he would have been protected.
Yes, then his punishment would have been 7 years. Because also, it's to not be able to engage in Torah would have been a real, not just geographic Gullus for Rav Kahana. It would have been a real punishment for Rav Kahana.
An atonement.
Right, exactly. But because he didn't, then it wasn't a real Gullus, and then this was that seems to be the point. Okay, but it's this idea that when a rabbi is angry at somebody, that can lead in that person's death is a common trope also in rabbinic literature.
Also, his pride, in a sense, also caused his downfall because if he had, it might have been his pride that made him feel he had to do this.
So maybe that could be. Okay, he stand right. He had, like the same point. He had to get up. Before he got, did it say before he was Kamma Kare? No, it didn't use that phrase. It just says he broke his neck. But the same thing, he had to get up and do something about it. That's interesting. Okay, so Lamacha, the next day, Amal Rabbi Yochanan Rabbanan, Rabbi Yochanan said to the rabbis, did you see how that Babylonian treated me? He's not feeling bad that he's dead. He's dead. Did you see how he treated me? Amalei, they said to him, well, that was just his normal way he looks. That's the way he talks. It's a physical condition. So, oh my God, he realized that he wasn't being mocked. He realized he did the wrong thing. Rabbi Yochanan, Alagabe Ma'arta. So he went to the cave where Reish Lakish was, where Rav Kahana was buried. Chaza dahavele achna. He saw that there was the hadrole achna, that there was a snake that was protecting the cave. And what we're going to see in a minute, the image is the snake eating its own tail, which I think is also like a very more Persian or Oriental type of an image. Okay, I don't think you're allowed to say Oriental anymore. Okay, more Persian type of an image. Okay, Amarle, so he said to it, Achna, snake, ptach pumcha, open up your mouth, and let the master enter in to the student. The snake wouldn't open up its mouth. Let one colleague go and greet his other colleague. The snake didn't open its mouth. Let the student, he's calling himself a student to Rav Kahana, enter and greet the Rav. He opened it up. So it's so funny. Even though Rav Kahana has sort of suffered this, and I think there's some sense of justly punishment or whatever, nevertheless underscoring the idea that Rav Kahana was such a greater, Torah sage than Rabbi Yochanan. By Rachme, but Rabbi Yochanan still had powers. So Rabbi Yochanan prayed for him, and he revived him, even though he had died. Okay, I guess if you could cause him to die, you could cause him to come back to life. Amarle, so Rabbi Yochanan said to him, if I had known that was just your normal, way, that was like a physical condition, I would not have been despondent. Like he never really directly said by the way, it's also interesting, right? Rabbi Kahana willfully caused somebody's death, and here he, unintentionally. One also wonders, it's just occurring to me now, this idea of darche hachi, the guy who was being forced to show the grain, also to some degree was not totally doing it of his own will. He might not have had a gun to his head, but to some degree he was being compelled by circumstances, right? So the same way Rabbi Yochanan sort of, had I known that was you couldn't really control it, I wouldn't have reacted this way. You could sort of wonder to reimpose that on the earlier case with the way Rav Kahana acted. Anyway, he says, Hashta Leisimar Bahadan, come back with me, back to the yeshiva. Amarle, so Rav Kahana, says, what is it? Fool me once, shame on me. So kill me once, shame on me. No, kill me once, shame on you. Kill me twice, shame on me. Okay, Amarle, if you'll pray to God that I won't die again, I don't know if that means ever or as a result of things you do, Azlina, I'll go with you. Be low, but if you're not, and you can't ensure me that this won't happen again, lo Azlina, I won't go with you. Hold the chalif, shite the chalif. Once we,
enough for me.
Miracles only happen, when miracle happened once, that was our one good opportunity that you brought me back to life. If you can't promise me it's not going to happen again, I'm not going to go. Okay. Tyre, he woke him up. It was funny. He was already talking to him, but whatever. He further revived him. Ukme, he stood him up. Shaile kol sveika the Havile, and Rav Yochanan asked Rav Kahana all the questions Rav Yochanan had never resolved for himself. Upashkina nihale, and Rav Kahana was able to answer them all for Rav Yochanan. Hainu dam Rav Yochanan. That's what Rav Yochanan says. Dilchon Amri, when you say you, the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, you think the Torah is ours? Dilohonu. It really is the Torah of Bava. They really know the Torah better than we do. Okay, that's the end of that story. Of course, Lee's very fascinating question.
Gets away with killing
Wait,
somebody.
remind me, are we reading the Talmud Bavli?
Yeah, exactly. You couldn't tell from the way that story concludes.
So at the end of the day,
All
Rav Kahana comes out all right by having killed this guy.
Yeah, Rav Kahana gets away with